Frankie, you got me back there? You good now? Okay, all right. Well, it's good to be able to speak before you again. It's been a while. I appreciate Rhodes covering for me, I think a couple weeks ago now when I was supposed to preach, but then got really sick, lost my voice and everything, so I wasn't able to speak. So fortunately, this is like the makeup sermon, and then I'll have 2 weeks later from today, I'll preach again. And so it works out because I'm starting a series or continuing a series, however you want to look at it. If you'll recall, one of the very first lessons I ever did here was this one, entitled Soldiers of Christ, A Warrior's Perspective. It's all about spiritual warfare. The whole point of the lesson was that when a military member reads, "You're a soldier of Christ," that has a lot of meaning. And so we talked a lot about spiritual warfare, being a soldier of Christ. We talked about putting on the armor and what it meant to a Marine to put on your gear, and then how that translates to spiritual warfare. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, there's so much more that can be said about spiritual warfare. And there was a point within that lesson where I said we need to know our enemy. And so for what the next 2 or 3 or more lessons are going to be about is about knowing our enemy. In the first lesson, we started with 3 major things that the soldier of Christ knows. You are at war, you need to be alert, and you need to be ready. Now that lesson, I think, is on our YouTube channel. You can go back and read it. It forms a good bedrock for what we're going to talk about in the next few lessons. It's certainly not required to follow along in today's lesson. I then covered the armor of God. But there's a whole lot more that can be said about how to be alert and how to be ready. And the key to being alert is knowing your enemy. We talked about how a soldier of Christ knows that we are in a war with evil forces constantly, whether you see them or not, and we don't, right? Our war is not against flesh and blood. We know that Satan exists and he's out to get us, especially if we're Christians. 1 Peter 5:8 says it this way: "Be of sober spirit, be on the alert, because your adversary, the devil, he prowls around like a roaring lion because he's looking for someone to devour." We know that Satan exists and that he's out to get us. And the moment you put on Christ, you become a target. You're in the middle of the crosshairs. And he's going to do everything he can to make you stumble, to make you fall away. The problem is that the devil and his angels don't look like that. And they don't look like that. Sometimes the devil masquerades as an angel of light. Sometimes he's so sneaky and sly, you don't even know it's him that's doing something to make you stumble. He is extremely subtle and unseen. And this is exactly why we need to see Satan at work everywhere. When we read the Bible, but when we listen to the news, and within our lives as well. For you to effectively be alert and ready, you must know your enemy. To get a good appreciation for this, let's go back to the military perspective. A good military knows their enemy inside and out. Part of my time in the military was in military intelligence, and it was my job to tell my commander in the command what the enemy does, who the enemy is, what's their capabilities, what's their strengths and weaknesses, and how they fight, and everything about the enemy, so my commander can be effective. A big part of that was teaching my commander and his forces what the enemy's tactics are, so they could be effective against them. You've heard me quote him before, but Sun Tzu once said that if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Why do military commanders need to know themselves? I need to know my strengths what I'm really good at, but I also need to know my weaknesses, and that's almost more important. You can think about this in terms of football, right? If I have a weak running game, then I'm going to pray for sunny skies. I'm not going to want a rainy day to play my game. That would be a big weakness for me. If I'm a military commander and I'm weak on this flank, I'm going to probably try and protect that in other ways and keep the enemy from attacking that flank, because a smart enemy, this is important, is going to attack you not where you're strong, but where you're weak. I was at Pinson this morning, and during the Bible study, one of the ladies basically said, look, Satan's not going to attack you where you're not tempted. He's going to attack you where you struggle the most. I'm not a smoker. I've never smoked. I've never been tempted to smoke. No problem for me. Satan's got nothing on me if he tries to tempt me to smoke. But there's areas where he can be successful, much more successful than tempting me to smoke. As Christians, we need to do the same exact thing. But we need to do better. We need to know the enemy, we need to know ourselves, and we need to know our God. We're usually pretty good about teaching about knowing God and knowing ourselves, but we don't hear nearly as much about knowing Satan and his tactics. Why is that? You see, the Bible talks about it, but it's quite rare that we actually see it personified, like in Job, where Satan comes before God and he says, look, Job's, you built a hedge around him. I bet you if I strike down his family, he'll turn away from you. I bet if you take his things, he's going to reject you. I bet if you let me strike his body, he's going to curse you. The rest of the Bible, it's pretty subtle. And so my hope is that in the next few sermons that I present, it gives you a lens through which you read the Bible and you see the world and you can say, well, that's Satan at work. And it may not say Satan did this, Satan entered Judas's heart. Sometimes it does, but more often it doesn't. And I think that's intentional, right? I think God did that kind of thing to make us study and to make us go look and say, why did he do that? Well, that's Satan at work. So we need to be wise as we read our Bibles and see Satan at work and see his tactics, and hopefully this lesson will help you to do that. So how does Satan work? How does he tempt us? You probably know the answer, at least partially. This is a pretty popular verse. We know it, right? 1 John 2:16, it's the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. Now notice it doesn't say Satan does those things. But what it does say is all that's in this world, and he finishes that verse with, this is of the world. Well, who's the king of this world, or the god of this world? 2 Corinthians 4:4. Satan, the god of this world, has blinded the minds of the unbelieving. And so we can see that those are some of his tactics, or at least what he will attack. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the boastful pride of life. Now, he used them against Jesus in the wilderness. That's another one where we see Satan came to him. And it was very personal. But we don't see Satan like that, like he did. And that's pretty generic, what we saw in the wilderness. But what I want to do with this lesson series is I want to put you in Satan's shoes and see his tactics from his point of view. Now, I borrowed this method from C.S. Lewis. He wrote a book called The Screwtape Letters. It's a fascinating book. It was written in World War II era, so it's a little, you can tell the guy wrote that in that time because of the way he speaks. But basically it's written from an uncle demon to a nephew demon. And so you have Screwtape and you have Wormwood. And so Screwtape is mentoring Wormwood on how to get his patient, a Christian, to fall away or to sin or to not care and just kick back and relax, not to grow in God. And there's multiple chapters, and in each chapter, it's enlightening to see it from the enemy's perspective. It's exactly what it is. And it was so cool for me that I was like, I've got to share this. How can I turn this into a sermon? And that's really what we're going to do this evening. The key to the book is to understand that all that Screwtape is teaching Wormwood, it's very subtle. He makes his human trip up through subtle means. It's not in your face. It's not like sticking that foot out there and making them trip. It is small things that we would just kind of look past and not think much of. And so we have to be very, very careful. And I recommend you read it if you get the chance. It's an easy to digest book, very short chapters. And so the goal in this lesson is for you to see the devil's tactics whenever you read your Bible so that you can see what Satan's doing when he's at work. So let's dive in. What's one of his tactics? You probably saw this one coming, right? Satan is a deceiver, and you can categorize every tactic he uses under deception. He is a liar and he's a father of lies. John 8:44. Revelation calls him the deceiver of the world. And so Satan is first and foremost a deceiver. Part of my training was in military deception. Getting the enemy to think a particular thing to cause him or her to do or not do something. If you're a small force, you don't want the enemy to attack you, so you're going to make yourself look a lot bigger, right? If you're really big, but you know that the enemy doesn't think you're big, you're going to, no, I'm not big. Come on, attack right here. You give them a juicy target and then overwhelm with force. You distract him by saying, hey, look over here, and then you attack this way. That's actually kind of what next lesson is about. In military deception, you're trying to trick the enemy without them knowing into believing a certain thing. Well, Satan, he does the same thing. He'd love to get you to think a particular thing in order to get you to go to hell where he's ultimately going to spend eternity. So you can say that the way he deceives us is through deception, and then the sermon would be over and we could go, but you're not that lucky. That's pretty generic, deception. There's a specific deception that I want to talk about this evening for the first tactic. And that is that it is easy to deceive you into continuing to believe something you already believe. This actually has a principle. It has a name. This was in military deception. It's the Magruder's principle. It's often much easier to deceive an enemy into hanging on to, this is a word we use, pre-existing, incorrect beliefs than it is to trick them into changing those beliefs. I gave an example where you have an enemy who thinks you're a smaller force than you actually are. Good. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to reinforce, I'm going to give you all kinds of evidence to make you keep believing that to my benefit. Well, Satan does the same thing because we're humans. And just like in the military, sometimes we have very tightly held beliefs that are incorrect. And it's a matter of pride sometimes to let go of that belief. We debate with people in denominations and they just can't let go of certain beliefs. And you're like, I can see it. It's right here. But they just hold on. But we're guilty of it too. And Satan would love for us to hang on to our incorrect, pre-existing beliefs and tie it to our pride. Got way ahead of my notes. Excuse me. Mark Twain once said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." Mark Twain had a way with words, didn't he? It ain't what you don't know that's going to get you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And so the easiest job Satan has is to reinforce your own erroneous beliefs. We do this to ourselves. It's a cognitive bias called the confirmation bias. We do this with the scriptures, but we do this with everything. We have a tendency to look for things that prove what we already believe rather than consider evidence that might prove us wrong. When you think about it in our daily life, we love to be right. We love to be right. And so everything that you see, you're going to sometimes twist, but sometimes just say, look, that just proves what I already believe. We can't approach the scriptures like that. We have a biblical example in the Pharisees. They had plenty of evidence to believe that the works that Jesus did proved him to be from heaven. Nicodemus even said it. You wouldn't be able to do these things unless you were from God. But Satan used their internal motives to blind them to the truth. Turn to Luke chapter 20. In Luke chapter 20, we see the Pharisees' motivations for not believing in Christ as the Messiah. In Luke chapter 20, starting in verse 45 through 47, it says, "And while all the people were listening, he said to the disciples," so this is Jesus speaking to his disciples about the Pharisees. He says, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes, and they love respectful greetings in the marketplaces, and chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets, who devour widows' houses and for appearance's sake offer long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation." The Pharisees loved money and power and the praise of men, and if Jesus was the Son of God, that all might be taken away from them. And actually, there's a scripture that says that. What happens if this is true? Then the Romans might come and take our place of power. So pride made them excuse away all the evidence that they had and say, no, this isn't the Messiah. He looks like something different. He looks like a military power, a political figure who's going to sit on a physical throne. So Satan had so deceived them that they were unwilling to see or accept that Jesus was who he said he was. So what does that have to do with the Magruder's principle? The Jews at the time, by and large, holistically believed the Messiah was going to be that political figure. I mean, I would submit we see evidence that the apostles did too. That's why they were scattered, because they thought the mission had failed. It wasn't until he was resurrected and explained all those things, they go, oh, that's what you were talking about. John actually says that in the beginning of his book. Oh, now that's why he said that. That was their pre-existing incorrect belief that Jesus wasn't going to look like what he ended up looking like. And they were unwilling to believe anything different. All right, so how do we see that today? Where does the rubber meet the road? How is this practical for you? How does Satan use this tactic today? Well, if I'm Satan and I'm talking to an atheist, I'm going to tell him that it's foolish to believe that there's a God. I'm going to say that science points to chance or the Big Bang or evolution. That you have enough things to believe in other than an all-knowing and all-powerful God. And who are you to doubt all these highly educated scientists? You see, I win if I'm Satan, if I get you to hold on to those beliefs, if I get atheists to hold on to those beliefs. What about non-believers? If I'm Satan, I'm going to tell you there's no way you can be forgiven. It's a lost cause. You're too bad. You've done too many bad things for God to forgive you. That you've done too many bad things in your life to deserve forgiveness. And notice there's a little bit of truth in that. You don't deserve forgiveness. The lie, the deception is usually hidden nice and conveniently under a little bit of truth. The full-blown lie is that God can't or won't forgive you. Certainly you don't deserve it, but he is willing to forgive anything. Look at Saul of Tarsus' rap sheet. I bet you didn't do that many bad things. I bet yours, I can't bet, but I'm willing to say that you probably aren't as bad as he was. But Satan's not going to state it that way. He's going to state it like, you're too bad to be forgiven, so don't even try. So if I'm Satan and I can get you to believe that you've done too many bad things to be forgiven, then I win. What about Christians? If I'm Satan, I'm going to tell a Christian that their false doctrines are true, whatever they are. I'll tell them to just believe what the preacher or the denomination says from the pulpit and never question it. Just take it at face value. And then I'm going to tie your beliefs so closely to your pride or someone you care about who taught you that it's an insult for someone to suggest that you could be wrong. If I can get you to stubbornly hold on to the things that you've always believed just because that's what you were always taught, then I win. You see, we should have confidence in what we believe. We should hold on tightly to the conviction. We don't want to be tossed to and fro like the waves. But I heard it stated one time, and I really like this analogy. You hold it with an open hand. I'm going to hold those things, but I'm not going to have the arrogance to think I can't be wrong. And I'm going to be willing for someone to say, hey, let me give you a different perspective on this. And give consideration to those things, because my loyalty is on the side of truth. And if I'm wrong, you can have this. I will trade this for the truth. And so hold on to our convictions, but don't hold them so closely that you take it to the grave with you, especially if it's wrong. So these are just some ways the enemy can use deceptive tactics against us. And so that's why it's so essential for Christians to be critical thinkers. We can't just believe what anyone says, including me, just because we say it from a pulpit or we have a lot of training in biblical studies. I don't, so I'll tell you that. We have to challenge what we're taught and even what we already believe. Because we could believe in an error. And Satan would love to keep you convinced in your error. So when you're going about your daily life, be on the alert and on the lookout for these tactics, and don't believe him when he says these kinds of things. Be a critical thinker. Your faith needs to be your own and have been put to the test. Because a faith that has been challenged and put to the test and asking hard questions that you struggle with and not being afraid to ask that is a very healthy thing. So be thinking about that. That's one trick, through deception. Well, the second one and the last one for this evening is comfort. Satan loves to use comfort. Comfort returns you to the things that you enjoy rather than delaying gratification. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24 and 25, it says, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. I don't know about you, this is a comforting passage. Because have you ever met those people that are like, sin's not pleasurable? What are you talking about? Sin is absolutely pleasurable. That is the enticement. That's what makes it so hard. That's what makes us give into it, because sometimes it's pleasurable when we have a worldly mindset. But God will tell us that can end in destruction. It can be very dangerous. Choosing the passing pleasures of sin over and over rather than denying that instant gratification in anticipation for a longer lasting, greater reward. I say, denying instant gratification. Moses had to go away for 40 years. And then he came back and he wandered with the Israelites for 40 years rather than sticking with his cushy job. I mean, he was Pharaoh's son. He lived in palaces and he had a great life. Talking about delaying gratification and avoiding comfort. There was a psychological, I guess you would say, test years ago. I think it was in the 70s or in the 80s. It was the marshmallow test. You might have heard this before, but there were little kids that were presented with one marshmallow. They were in a room with a table, and they had one marshmallow in the middle of the table. And the deal was, you can have this marshmallow. But if you don't eat this marshmallow for 15 minutes, I'm going to come back. I'm going to leave the room, the adult says. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you a second marshmallow. If you can avoid eating that one marshmallow. If you get a chance, go YouTube it. It is hilarious what these kids did to avoid eating the marshmallow. They wouldn't make eye contact with it. They would turn around and face the wall. They would do anything they could do not to have the marshmallow. Some of them didn't want to delay gratification. They just ate it. He said I could have it right now. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm going to eat it right now. But some of them said, you know what? There's something better coming if I can delay this gratification. If you want to know the rest of the story, those scientists, those people who did this study, followed up. They kept in contact with these kids. And they followed up with those kids. And the children who delayed gratification and got that second marshmallow were by and large more successful in life when they grew up. Because they learned early, or they knew early, I can delay this gratification for something better that's coming. When I phrase it like that, you know exactly what I'm talking about spiritually. It's real comfortable to just pick up that marshmallow and eat it right there. But we as Christians need to be able to delay gratification. So if I'm Satan and I can get you to take the comfortable choice rather than the right one, I win. Remember Satan's first temptation to Jesus in the wilderness. He's starving. It's been 40 days. I don't go 4 hours without eating most days. I can't imagine what 4 days feels like. I did fast a long time one time, but it wasn't 40 days. Can you imagine how hungry he was? And what was Satan's first temptation? That's a tasty looking rock right there. You can make that into bread. Satisfy your hunger. That's the comfortable thing. And he absolutely had the power to do that. That's a choice of comfort over righteousness. That would have been abusing his power. Now, the other way that you can say comfort is complacency. Complacency is a feeling of satisfaction with yourself and your achievements to the point that you basically don't really try anymore. Somebody in here once said something to the effect of, well, when you stop paddling, yeah, I think it was Frankie. I thought it, but I wasn't going to say it. I was going to misattribute. I forget exactly how he stated it. When you stop paddling, the river is going to take you downstream. If you're not gaining ground, you're actually losing ground. You never stop trying. You never give up and say, I'm good. I can hit autopilot and I can just coast. Because you actually could be losing ground. You stop trying to improve when you're complacent. This attitude is the epitome of arrogance, but it's also giving in to comfort. Because continuing to grow is difficult. Continuing to read the Bible in your later years, I can't empathize. I don't know. I'm not going to make eye contact with anybody. Sorry. We should never get complacent as Christians. David did this before he sinned with Bathsheba. All the stories of David before that account, David was out with his warriors in battle. And although it never calls out David for staying at home, that's how the writer presents the beginning of the story. His soldiers were out in the battlefield and he stayed at home. And that, to a reader, will go, uh-oh. I think that's a picture of complacency because he always went with his army. This time he did the comfortable thing and he stayed in his palace. That's where that whole thing started. In the military, a lot of bad things happened because we got complacent. It happened all the time, especially in the squadrons I was in, because you think, man, I got this, no big deal. And then all of a sudden you forget to flip a particular switch in the jet or whatever. Really, really bad things can happen. The same can be true for Christians as well. Don't get complacent and don't seek the comfortable route. You see, comfort and complacency keeps you warming a pew and having a bare minimum mentality. What's the bare minimum I need to do to be saved? So if I'm Satan I'm going to make you feel like just showing up on Sunday morning for worship service. None of that applies to you because you're here this evening. And some are sick, so I know that there are people watching. But that's going to be enough. And you don't have to do anything else for the rest of the week. No Bible studies, no prayer, no Bible study on your own or with others. You don't have to give God a second thought throughout the week other than when you step into the church building. It's another lie that Satan will tell you. You see, warming a pew gives you just enough feel good to keep your guilt low and live a comfortable life. Check that box. And you don't have to do the uncomfortable thing of admitting and confronting your sins. Comfort also keeps you from evangelizing. This one kind of hits particularly home for me, right? Because you fear rejection. Rejection is uncomfortable. If I'm Satan, I'm going to whisper quietly in your ear that people won't accept the word, and that's a failure on your part. That it's your job to win souls, not just spread the gospel. When the truth is, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting God. Remember what God told Samuel? Samuel's infuriated because the people want the king, and he was like, God is your king. What are you doing? You don't need to be like the other nations. You're different. You're set apart. And he took it personally to the point where God says, stop. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. But if I'm Satan, oh, by the way, Jesus was rejected by a whole lot of people. So, in a way, being rejected makes you more like Christ. But if I'm Satan, I'm not going to mention those things. I'm going to highlight the pain you'll feel when people turn you away or turn the gospel away. It feels like they're turning you away. Comfort. What about comfort in money? Another thing I'll do if I'm Satan is to tie your comfort directly to your finances. I'm going to get you to put your trust in money. Think about it. If you have a lot of money, you're not necessarily worried about paying the bills. Now you become worried about losing your money. My papa always said, and I think he was quoting somebody, if you ask a rich man, how much more would you need for it to be enough? He would always say, just a little bit more. We like to be comfortable in that area. So if I'm Satan, I'm going to remind you that your safety comes from money, that there's comfort in having money, and that you need to hold on to it, or you're not going to have your security blanket, even when there's someone standing right in front of you in need, and you can help them with money. You see, I think Satan was at work when the rich young ruler came to Jesus, and then he walked away because he couldn't give away all his possessions because he had great wealth. And this is what I'm talking about. When you read the scriptures, you can see Satan at work in the background, even though it's not immediately called out. That's Satan at work when he walked away sad because he had great wealth. His wealth was his God. And so Satan wins. So when you're going about your daily life and you have the desire to do the comfortable thing, stop and consider, is this from the devil? It's not always going to be, but when you feel pretty good and you feel pretty confident, that's a good time to stop a moment and take stock. Am I being attacked by the devil? I don't feel very attacked. I feel pretty comfortable. That's the attack sometimes. And so we need to be very careful with that. Is this his way of making me stumble? Is there something else better that I should be doing even if it's uncomfortable? Many times, not always, but often, the right thing to do is uncomfortable. And we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You know, Abram probably wasn't very comfortable with leaving his land and going somewhere. Who knows where? Go that way. All right, I'll go that way. Where I'm going to land. Moses clearly wasn't comfortable with going back to Pharaoh to tell him to let my people go. David was faced with multiple opportunities to kill Saul, remember my last lesson, and take the throne, but he knew the right thing to do was the uncomfortable thing, to wait and let it happen on God's timing. Jesus could have done the comfortable thing and avoided the cross. And he wanted to do it. He wanted the cup to pass from him. Any other way, Lord, let this cup pass from me. But thanks be to God, he didn't take the comfortable route, because that's how we have access to salvation. Now, the apostles, in contrast, they did the comfortable thing when they denied Jesus, and they ran, and that was a mistake. But there was a happy ending there, because they learned their lesson, and extra biblical accounts tell us they were all but one martyred for their faith. They ultimately did the uncomfortable but right thing. So beware of comfortable things. Many times, Satan is lurking behind them with a trap. The other thing about comfort, and I added this one this time. Do you remember this from the first lesson that I did? Take up the shield of faith. That looks pretty heavy. Does that not look heavy to you? The Roman soldiers have this almost like toes to neck size shield. The comfortable thing would be to put that down from time to time. But that's when you're in the most danger. And so as Christians, we can't put down our shield of faith, even if it is the comfortable thing to do. Well, next time, so 2 weeks from today, Lord willing, we'll talk about one tactic that Satan uses, which is distraction. Remember how I said in military deception, I'm going to make you look over here while I do something over here. Pay no attention to this. I want you to focus on this. And a military commander can be very successful in distracting his enemy. So you have 2 weeks to think, to read, as you read, to think about how distraction is a tactic that is employed by Satan. But generically, for the next few days, let's say for your mission for this week is to be on the lookout for Satan's tactics, both in the scriptures and all around you. Don't just read the stories in the Old Testament. Study them to see what tactic is being employed or what weakness is being exploited by evil forces. Is it pride? Is it greed? Is it lust? Learn how our enemy works so that you can effectively counter his tactics like Jesus did in the wilderness. Well, as I said earlier, we have to know ourselves and know our enemy. But we have to know God. When we have God on our side, we can resist the devil and he will flee from us. Another very comforting passage. But we have to have God on our side. If you're here this evening and you haven't responded to the gospel, you don't have God on your side and you stand no chance. If you need to make that right or if you have any other need, won't you come forward as we stand?